I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show.
What is going on?
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
CJ, this episode is going to go down as one of our more jam-packed shows. I don't think we've had one this story-laden, as I said before, jam-packed. I don't think we've had one as this packed in a while because, you know, the end of the season, different storylines, more focused on stuff on the ice. But this has a lot of stuff off the ice that we're going to be looking at. The findings of the report on the NHLPA from Cousin Connor are out. A bombshell report on Eugene Melnyk was out in The Athletic. Those two things kind of dropped on the Friday, and when we were recording, we didn't get to those. So we're going to be able to spend a lot of time on those and a couple other news and notes that took place in the hockey world, including Carey Price coming back, Mike Bossy passing away, unfortunately. I just want your thoughts also on some details over a potential new women's league that Jeff Marek put out over the weekend. Kirill Kaprizov doing his thing as well. The Leafs, got to shout out the Leafs as well. Setting records for most wins and points in the season. And of course, it's Monday, so we're going to have Ask CJ questions. CJ, are you ready to go through the gauntlet of today's episode?
My man, this might be your day for a coffee. I don't know how you're going to get through all this. I'll take a breath. But, you know, we're ramping up. It's 2 weeks to the playoffs, kids. 2 weeks. And so I think the news and notes will continue to be busy because as we get to the end of the regular season, obviously there could be coaching news and things like that. So it's going to be a pretty frantic next stretch here, Julian.
Absolutely. Also, Thursday will likely be my coffee day because I'm doing a hit on breakfast TV at 6:30 in the morning.
I got one for you today.
There we go. I'm doing a hit 6:30 in the morning, a radio hit on TSN 690, 7:30, the podcast right after that. And that podcast will be unveiling something we kind of teased on a previous episode. We kind of joked that would be a cool thing to do. But on the Thursday episode, we're going to unveil something that a lot of the listeners and watchers on YouTube can get into. But in the meantime, let's start with the report that came out from Cousin O'Connor on the NHLPA, which essentially clears them and Donald Fehr of any wrongdoing with regards to the handling of Kyle Beach, the former Blackhawks draft pick who put out a whole bunch of allegations towards a former video coach, Brad Aldrich. In previous episodes, you can go back to our log and you can listen to our coverage on that. But I want to talk about the report today. I have to admit, just putting my own personal spin on it, I'm a bit flabbergasted. How is it that the NHLPA, or at least Donald Fehr, how is it that he could be cleared of any wrongdoing? And how could it be said that there's no systemic failure when the fact that there was a miscommunication and a misunderstanding in the first place should be enough for it to be deemed a systemic failure? CJ, what did you think of the report?
Well, I think it's remember, it's a legal document. And
yes,
you know, one of the challenging aspects of concluding that there's no systemic failure is legally they didn't find anything that could back that up. But you know, I think when you read through the details yourself, if you take the time to do so, it's really hard to conclude that isn't what happened, frankly. And you know, the biggest issue is that there were phone calls and emails between Donald Fehr and players' agents that neither side remembered the content of when they were interviewed by the investigators. And so, you know, if you and I have a private phone call and neither of us says what was said, it's hard to then draw conclusions in a legal manner from those phone calls if neither party remembers what information was exchanged there. And I think that was one of the linchpins to the findings in this case. But I'm with you. I think that if we step back from the report itself, which, you know, I guess the takeaway is, look, we saw the Jenner and Block report. Immediately after that, Stan Bowman, Al McIsaac, Joel Quenneville were out of jobs for their role or not participating enough in terms of taking action with the Kyle Beach allegations. And, you know, so some might have thought that would be a similar thing that could happen with Donald Fehr here. That's not going to happen. But I do think, you know, we are sort of signaling the end of Donald Fehr's time with the NHLPA. Certainly doesn't appear that he'll be forced out per se, but I think that, you know, it undermines a little bit what's going on. You know, he's also 74. I think that it was reasonable to expect that his tenure with that organization, you know, would be wrapping up some point in the near future. And I think that'll be kind of the next focal point of discussions about the players union is just what's the plan for succession? How do they go about identifying a successor? And then ultimately, when does that happen? And there are some out there, I can tell you, Julian, that believe that will happen before the end of the summer. So, given that we're here in mid-April, that's a pretty rapid, timeline. And I have to think on some level it's connected, even though if it's not directly connected.
So the report goes out Friday. We are recording on a Monday. Between then, have you heard anything from players or player reps on their thoughts and feelings on the report?
Yeah, I've had some discussions or texts over the weekend. I mean, I think it's one of these things. It depends what side you fall on to begin with. I mean, someone like Donald Fehr, he's had some critics, quietly behind the scenes. And then, of course, he's got those that believe in him. And the problem with the report, it's open-ended enough, I suppose. If you want to believe that he's innocent or that he's done well, you might conclude he was exonerated by the report because, by the truest nature of what was written there, that's technically the case. But then if you've found parts of his leadership lacking, you might read all the details and conclude, okay, the investigators didn't have enough to say that there was willful ignorance or that there was some sort of systemic failure within the organization, but they just couldn't say that. And so, I think predictably I found a mixed bag. I would say this. My reading or taking of the temperature is not overwhelmingly one side or the other. But, I do think there's a larger dissatisfaction or just, it's not even just dissatisfaction. I think it's just an understanding that there might be a new voice needed, new leadership needed, someone younger, not to be ageist, but 74, it's getting up there. And so, I do think that does seem to be kind of where this spins onto next. But the report itself wasn't maybe as damning as some would have guessed. And, the executive board voted last week of the NHLPA to make it public. I think when that happened, it was natural to wonder, what's in there? Why would they do this? And I think ultimately they just sided on it being in the public interest to do so.
Whoever ends up succeeding Donald Fehr, whether they're 74 or 34 or 14, it doesn't matter. They should ensure that they are in a position where they can lead the association and ensure that if anyone is to report any allegation like what Kyle Beach did, they're in a position where it doesn't get miscommunicated. There are no misunderstandings. And it is able to go through the chain of command so something can be done. And we're not in a situation where we're looking back and thinking, well, why couldn't they have done better? That needs to be said. What did you think of it being rolled out on an Easter Friday and a power outage? There were reports of that, which kept it from being delayed. I'm a bit confused at that as well.
There was a power outage. I know that to be fact because I live downtown Toronto. But, whether that would affect servers or not, I have to take them at their word on that. Honestly, I understand the suspicion. I mean, either way, it was due to come out Friday, which is Good Friday and is a holiday here in Ontario anyway. And I suspect most places around. So
Quebec too.
The one thing I'll say with that though, is we live in a way more 24/7 world. I mean, even 20 years ago when I first started sort of being around the office and journalist's office, I mean, people would put out sort of unwelcome news or unpleasant, items at 4:55 on a Friday
News dump.
Trying to either get not full coverage of their story or just have it partially out there. And in the old school newspaper deadlines, that actually could impact the way a story was covered or discussed. I guess a lot of people are probably busy with their families on Friday. I still think that I'm pretty deep in hockey Twitter. I saw it being discussed pretty prominently there. I've seen a number of people write articles about it. I addressed it in my Monday column with North Star Bets. I saw Pierre LeBrun had a piece in The Athletic. Ken Campbell put out something. I mean, there was, and there were others too, so it wasn't as though this didn't get covered or scrutinized. So I'll grant them a little more grace there. And just take them at their word. But, at least they put it out. That's one thing I'll say. I mean, over time, things like this have tended to be done more in private. And I think we're moving towards, a little bit more transparency with these types of things. And so I will tip a hat to that, even if, maybe didn't land with the bombshell news that some people thought would be in there.
I still won't necessarily give them that grace because of the fact that they have the convenience of jumping it on a holiday Friday. And I'm still just a little bit suspicious at the fact that even if it is a legal document, they did find through legal reasons that there was no wrongdoing on the part of Donald Fehr in the NHLPA. It's still a bit suspicious. And I'm just always going to have that cynicism with regards to the association on that front. That's just me. That's not me trying to just project on anyone else or anything like that. And people can go on and say, oh, well, that's what the report says. But I'm sorry, there's no reason for me to think that, everything should be hunky dory when we clearly are still picking up the pieces over somebody who lost their entire career over some wrongdoings that people tried to sweep under the rug for the better part of a decade. I'm always going to have cynicism over that. I'm also going to have cynicism over how
systemic failure in the hockey system. Clearly,
absolutely.
I know we've been over this, but he was failed on a number of levels, and I think including by NHLPA leadership. That legally maybe the investigators didn't find that. I think it's pretty clear that there was any one of a number of people that could have stepped up or stepped in and done something and didn't, and that that is terrible. It's awful.
Yes, I'm also skeptical and cynical about the way about a successor and Fehr, if I understand correctly, being involved in that. It's just kind of weird. It's like you mess up and you still get to kind of plot your exit a little bit. Maybe I don't even think I'm being that hard on Fehr, to be honest with you. I just think it's ridiculous. But can we talk a little bit more about who the successor possibly could be? I know you mentioned there's a possibility we could see one as early as maybe later this month or into next month, possibly. Could it be Matthew Schneider? Could it be someone else? What are we thinking here?
I can't say with any certainty who it's going to be. I don't think that they're that deep into the process. A name that I've heard a fair bit whispered over the last few months is Glenn Healy. Glenn is someone I actually worked with a bit at Sportsnet, so I'm not putting his name forward just because I know him. But it is definitely a name that's been out there. He's got a unique background. He would spend 15 years in the NHL as a player. He worked as a broadcaster. He actually spent some time at the NHLPA back under Paul Kelly when he was executive director. He's now led the NHL Alumni Association for the last 5 years and done some good things there. And so, his name's been out there. I think Matthew Schneider is a natural to mention as well. He's essentially been Donald Fehr's right-hand man. Like Glenn, had a long career as a player and has worked for the union for a number of years. I wonder if some player agents, maybe some veteran player agents, end up in that mix. I think that there's some crossover in skills there, especially those with a pure legal background who know the ins and outs of the CBA and contract negotiations, player issues. Those types of people make sense. And then, finally, I do think it's possible it's someone entirely outside the hockey world. In Paul Kelly's case, he didn't come from a pure hockey background when they hired him, for example. Donald Fehr was from the labor world. What's interesting is when I look back on that period where Fehr was hired, at the time, it was a no-brainer. He had led the Major League Baseball Players Association for a long time, had some successes there in terms of CBA negotiations with the owners. And, there was no question at that moment that the NHLPA should hire him if he wanted to come. I think that was always sort of what hung in the air. He initially served as an advisor for the NHLPA before, eventually being appointed the executive director. To me, there's not that person doesn't exist again. And so, it will make the search interesting. And I get, look, the average fan probably won't be that engaged in this decision, this story. But it does have a huge impact on the way the sport goes, and certainly when it comes to collective bargaining. We don't want to turn this into a lockout podcast, but 2026 is the earliest the current memorandum of understanding can expire. So this isn't that far in the future for the person in terms of you want to get them hired, you want them to get familiar with the issues, and get to work on what that will be. So those are some of the names I've heard. I think as this search maybe becomes a real official thing, because at this point it isn't that. We'll get a little more clarity on who the favorites are, but that's kind of the flavor that's out there now.
Anything else on this topic before we move on?
Nothing for me.
Okay, cool. So we'll move on to a report that came out in The Athletic also on Friday. We just missed this. And I know a few people were saying, why didn't we get to this or anything like that? We did just miss it. A report about Eugene Melnyk, who we've talked about on this podcast before, about how complicated his legacy is as Ottawa Senators owner. It comes out, Ian Mendez, Dan Robson, and Katie Strang collaborating on this piece together. Just some Coles notes of some different things that were revealed. essentially Melnick putting out threatening emails to employees, belittling and stifling the team's efforts to support social causes like Black Lives Matter and Love is Love, taunting opposing players while alienating his own. A lot of people know about stories with that in his own organization. It's pretty much like, and obviously coming out within days of Eugene Melnyk's passing from a long illness. CJ, what did you think of that story, if you were able to get to it?
Well, it was really well done, very thorough, well sourced. It was a real complete look at him. I thought it was, I know basically we're going to debate here, was it too soon? And it's hard for me to even make that judgment, even being in the media, sort of knowing how the sausage is made, for example, knowing all three writers in this case and having tremendous professional and personal respect for them. It's hard to say that, but like, if you just look at it purely for what it is, I mean, I think they captured some of those complexities of Eugene Melnyk, much like Ian Mendez did the day after his death with his obituary. They highlight the things you've referenced, which obviously created a difficult workplace culture, raise a number of red flags, but they also highlight some of the things he did, charitably, and the way that even those that he sort of turned his back on still had great fondness and love and respect and admiration for. So, people are complex, these things don't tend to be black and white. And I thought, it's a long, long story. I thought they did a great job of capturing that. Really, the debate, if there's any that I've seen, is just, is it too soon? And I don't know how you ever answer that. I mean, there's not a handbook for this stuff. It's very clear that they've been working on this for months, if not longer. Would you have preferred, for example, had they dropped that story a few weeks before his death, would that have looked equally as distasteful? I don't know how you answer that. I think that what they've done is give an honest, well-researched account of, a big figure in the NHL, a big figure in Canadian sports landscape, someone who maybe was a little misunderstood at times, but, I'll say this. I also saw people saying, well, all this stuff was really well known. It's like, okay, we had a sense that organization was flailing. I didn't know the degrees to which those things were happening. Like I learned a ton in that story too, even though I've been in the hockey industry basically the entire time Eugene Melnyk owned the Senators. And so I think there's a valuable piece of journalism there. Maybe if they move it a week, or like if it comes out a week or two from now, that's better. But then, the playoffs are on. I think no matter what, they were going to be criticized on the timing. And so they did what was best. They took a fair stance, and I thought that was a great piece of journalism.
Yeah, there's no stories like this. Like, you're always going to get flack from people about when it's going to drop. If you drop it the day after, if you drop it 3 months later, people are always going to just say, well, why is this relevant? So I don't know if it's fair to say Ian, Dan, and Katie would have been in a lose-lose regardless, but yeah, like, it doesn't matter when they're going to drop it. There's going to be some pretty damning stuff in there that people who might be defenders of Eugene Melnyk were going to get upset about anyway. So I don't think there's any point in debating that, because look, it's obviously a really good report, really well sourced, really great job on their part, obviously. But yeah, people were going to be upset about it regardless. I
think what's hard is we can have sympathy for his children, right? I mean, I lost my mom a few years ago. I understand what it's like to have a parent die. It's a very emotional time, and I understand that view. I really do. I'm sympathetic to it, but if you look at him, the character, a lot of the stories in there don't really paint him as someone deserving of public sympathy for the way he treated people. And so that's a really difficult thing to balance. And again, I don't know there's a perfect way to do it. If it waited till July just to arbitrarily pick a date in the future, people might say, well, he's been dead for a few months. Why are you even raising these issues now? And so, I think that they were in a difficult position, but the one thing they can really put their hat down on, or that they can stand by, is that, they stand by their reporting, and it's all these things happen. They're true. And I think, again, there were great efforts made to highlight some of the positive aspects of them too, or even, the employee hired from Ukraine and later turned his back on. And then, even just recently, not long before his death, kind of out of the blue, Eugene had wired him money so that he could get his family out of Kiev prior to the invasion by Russia. So it does highlight some of the other aspects of them too. It's not all just, anonymous emails that were leaked to the writers. And so I think they took a complex topic and approached it fairly and straightforward. And I guess you're just going to have to deal with some criticism when you write that kind of story.
My apologies for not getting the person who tweeted this at you, but someone when we were taking questions in for Ask CJ, wanted to know what it's like interacting with organizations like the Senators who have these toxic workplaces and cultures, I guess, in your viewpoint as a reporter.
I'm not there every day. And so I think when you're around a team all the time, you have a different understanding. You maybe you pick up on cues a little bit more. Really when you're talking about dealing with the Senators organization, like over the last number of years, say if I went there for a game, I would see one of their couple PR people who I know and have sort of a personal relationship enough to say hi and have a conversation. How's your family? How are things? I interact, say, with their general manager, Pierre Dorion, from time to time. Again, not constantly or anything like that, but and so those people I've never had any issues with, frankly. I've always I covered the Senators. I'm trying to think, just going back now, but I covered the Senators in a few playoff runs. In 2017, I covered the run to the Eastern Conference Final. I was around them every day. Like it doesn't shine through necessarily when you only drop in every once in a while, I guess. And so people like Ian Mendez or Bruce Garriock, Don Brennan, people that have been around that team a long time would know all this more. But man, there's 32 teams. And obviously this is one that, at least geographically, Julian is located close to where you and I live. So we're going to see them a little bit more. They play in the division of the Canadiens or the Leafs, and we're around those teams a lot. Going to a road game there is a drive, which is a flight. But, it's just hard to be on top of everything happening with every team. And so, again, there was ideas that everything wasn't going perfect there. You could see it in the community, the way they there was billboards, Melnick out, taken out by fans. Attendance has dropped precipitously over the years in Ottawa. My brother-in-law is actually a season ticket holder. The Senators are a part season ticket holder. So, I keep up on sort of some of the comings and goings with him. But yeah, I didn't know, I guess it was to this degree that things had gone wrong. And frankly, Eugene Melnyk didn't have a huge presence around the team. Like, it wasn't like he was there all the time, right? He lived in Barbados primarily. Obviously, those that worked for him were in constant communication with him, but going to Canadian Tire Center, I very rarely ever saw him and didn't have the sense of any of this stuff.
And beyond not seeing him that much at the CTC, like how many times were you in a scrum with him throughout your time in hockey journalism?
Well, I was in the one scrum that was pretty famous when they had the outdoor game there, when he openly opined about Ottawa, like moving the team like a McDonald's. There's a couple of times at Board of Governors meetings where I would have been in a scrum with him, but I didn't have any personal relationship with Eugene Melnyk at all. Never talked to him one-on-one and didn't really know him. But the hockey world's small. I was around him, and the truth is this too, though. Like, as much as the organization got hollowed out, for lack of a better term, right? Like, they had I got nothing but huge respect for Daniel Alfredsson, for example. And so, to me, it's a huge warning sign back in, was it 2013, when he signs in Detroit? Because Daniel Alfredsson, here's one thing that's unusual about him. Most Swedes end up, even if they live in North America for 18 years, end up moving back to Sweden. Like, he moved his family. He still lives in the Ottawa area. He was raising his kids there. Like the last thing he would really, truly want to do was leave Ottawa at that point in time. And I think it was a warning sign about what must be going on. Well, over time, of course, they've become a much leaner operation, shoestring at times, you might say. And so it looked like Eugene Melnick was someone who was having financial difficulties or challenges. But I didn't necessarily know that it was, him. I hadn't seen any of these emails that are in the story. So, it's really hard to, you can't know in real time, I guess, everything that's going on. It's just a fact. I understand people want that to be the case, but it wasn't a case of turning a blind eye to it. I just, you can imagine if you were on the receiving end of those emails that you weren't broadcasting those to everyone who walked in the building. So, some of that maybe became safer over time for those people, or they don't work for the organization anymore, things like that. But it takes real great journalism like what we saw here to unearth a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, like if you're getting emails like that, like the first thing, I mean, that should be journalism 101. If you're getting emails like that from people, the first thing you shouldn't be doing is like just broadcasting them out to people. You go to whatever team you have and you try to source them, either get a second check or anything like that. Like you have to be careful with stuff like that. And I can understand you're not in the Ottawa area. It's not necessarily something you're looking at like every day, day in, day out. Ian Mendes, of course, would do that. That being said, just seeing stuff like that done, seeing stuff like the coverage over the Cow Beach ordeal, like that just as me as a young journalist, I want to get involved in some of that stuff, and I want more of those stories to see the light. And I want us to ensure that our profession, we are not just seen as these pencil pushers who are just writing game recaps and just hanging out in press boxes. Like I want to be part of that change where we're able to report on some real crazy stuff that should not be in the game, or just stuff like real stories that people can look at and say, hey, this is actual journalism. So yeah, I will always give praise to Katie Strang. I give praise obviously to Dan Robson and Ian Mendes as well for their work on this story with regards to Eugene Melnyk. And look, if you think this came out at a too soon of a time around his death, well, I mean, I don't think there would have been any real quote unquote good time to put out this type of story. So we've gone through the first two topics today. There are a few smaller NHL notes that we don't necessarily need to spend as much time on, which we can kind of get through over the next few minutes. It's been a pretty eventful last few days. I would like to also mention the fact that we have lost Mike Bossy over the last few days, and Mike Bossy passing away after a battle with lung cancer. I was not alive for his heyday, but we're talking about one of the greatest goal scorers the NHL has ever seen. And Alexander Ovechkin speaking about him, and other John Tavares and other members of the hockey community speaking about him. I was in Montreal the day of his passing at the Canadiens game with the Canadiens and the Islanders. The Canadiens taking a moment to acknowledge Mike Bossy as well. CJ, I'd like to know your thoughts on an Islanders and an NHL legend in Mike Bossy. Again, one of the greatest goal scorers of all time.
Well, I would urge you, if you didn't see it, to go back and watch the interview that Brian Trottier did with Ron McLean on Hockey Night in Canada Saturday in the pregame. Mm-hmm. To me, that was the most compelling 7 minutes of TV I saw in the last week or two. Brian Trottier, of course, met Mike Bossy back in 1977 at Islanders camp. They became fast friends. They became lifetime friends. He actually went and spent 2 days with him towards in two of his final days. And said in which they sort of laughed and told stories. He sang to him. It was really touching. And I guess that's been what stood out most to me. I mean, I'm with you. Mike Bossy's career was a little before my time. I never met the man. Know about his goal scoring prowess, know about 9 straight 50-goal seasons and being part of that Islanders dynasty, but didn't know a lot about him personally. And I think you can get a little bit of a window into that from that interview with Brian Trottier. A lot of heart in there, and sad story. 65 is too young to go. It's nice that they got that time together, the old friends, but it's a loss. And you're right, someone whose career might be maybe a little overlooked or overshadowed just because it came right. His career is ending really in the brilliance of Gretzky and Lemieux. Being at the top of their powers, and those players were such bright lights and bright stars, at a period where information was starting to travel a little easier. You could follow out of market games a little easier. Then obviously we transitioned to the McDavid and Ovechkin era. Like, I feel like maybe as one of the game's great stars didn't fully get his due, and this might change that in a sense. I think unfortunately your death, we're talking about him now, right? If he hadn't died, we probably wouldn't be. But just a tremendous player, but it sounds like a tremendous man. And my only little bit of sorrow is our paths never crossed in either the media world or just at events over the years. And sounds like he was a great guy and made a strong impression on those closest to him.
Yeah, that's the sense I'm getting with Mike Bossy as well. A guy who, long after his career was over, spent time with TVA Sport here in Quebec as an analyst. Obviously, his upbringing up here in Quebec, obviously being revered by fans here. I mean, the fact that the Islanders played the day of Mike Bossy's passing in Montreal, like that was I mean, the emotions were going to be on high for that Canadiens game that night. And then later on, like about 2-3 hours after the announcement of Mike Bossy's passing, we learned Carey Price is returning to the net. He plays his first game in 9 months and 8 days with the Montreal Canadiens against the New York Islanders. Even though it's a loss for him, still makes a return, playing his 708th career game, his first since the Stanley Cup final last July, which as the days go by, it becomes more and more of a passing memory. It's gone from, wow, the Canadiens were in the Stanley Cup final to, oh yeah, right. Wow. The Canadiens were in the Stanley Cup final. I know we talked about Carey Price on a previous episode, but any thoughts on Price coming back?
Well, it was an awesome moment. I saw his family was there in the front row watching him, his kids. Obviously great for them to get to see dad play. And we're talking about one of the great players of his generation too. And so it's nice to see him work his whole way back after that time and having at least some understanding of what he's dealt with physically, but also mentally, emotionally, with his time spent at the treatment center, in the fall. And so, I think it's good to see him there. I still wonder what the future holds. I don't think that's any clearer today, honestly, than before. I mean, is he physically going to be able to hold up and just play a normal workload next season? I don't think we'll know that for sure. He probably can't even know it, honestly. I mean, he's getting back in there. He's giving it a go. But he's had a number of knee issues over the years, also had hip surgery. It is a long time off. He's getting older, all these things pile up. And so, I'm not even fully clear that we'll see him back next season as a regular member of any team, because everyone wants to discuss whether the Canadiens trade him or not. It's all sort of preliminary. And so this is at least the step for him figuring that out. And it was a good moment, a great moment for him personally, I can imagine, just with the work he put in to get in there and to play. But this is still this is a story that's very much to be determined in terms of what directions it goes and just how much hockey Carey Price has left in him. I'm not saying his career is done by any means, but I don't think we know for sure how many more times we're going to see him skate out and play in an NHL game. I think that's still a little bit up in the air.
The only thing we really know is that Carey Price holds the cards to everything, because if you hear the Canadiens talk about him, they're basically saying, you know what, Carey Price is going to play when he feels like he wants to play. And with regards to trading him or moving him at all, he still has his no movement clause. And in January, he said he had no intentions of leaving, but that was also before Kent Hughes came in as GM. Jeff Gordon would have already been there by then, but Dominic Ducharme, I think, would have still also been head coach. So Carey Price, as far as we know, still wants to be a Montreal Canadiens player, and we haven't heard anything to indicate he wants to change his mind otherwise. So as long as he holds the cards in here, it's going to be him kind of flipping the dominoes and setting everything in motion here. That's basically the only thing we know about Carey Price with regards to his future.
His health too matters, right? Like, it's hard to imagine him moving on if he doesn't feel like he can play. Would you bother if you weren't reasonably sure you could be back at a high level? And I don't think he has that certainty right now. I really don't believe that he's fully sure where he's at physically.
This podcast is sponsored by HelloFresh. With HelloFresh, you can get farm fresh, pre-portioned ingredients and seasonal recipes delivered right to your doorstep. Skip the grocery store and count on HelloFresh to make home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. That's why it's America's #1 meal kit. It's all about convenience with HelloFresh. The ingredients come pre-portioned, so you're not overbuying or wasting food or anything like that. It's also easier than ever to get filling meals on the table in a snap with options like family-friendly or quick and easy recipes. Get farm fresh seasonal produce and easy to make recipes delivered right to your door every single week. It's really easy to do with HelloFresh. You can go to HelloFresh.com/Johnston16 and use code Johnston16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 free gifts. HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit. You don't need a summer getaway to transport yourself. Book your smooth escape with the wax experts at European Wax Center. A fresh wax transports you to a smooth state of mind where you feel effortlessly confident. This summer, whether you're going far away or sticking closer to home, the relaxed, confident feeling you're dreaming of is closer than you think. Just visit your local European Wax Center. Whether you want to focus on your back, your shoulders, your legs, your nose, or even your eyebrows, you can get groomed by the experts At European Wax Center, they offer personalized consultations so you can find the wax that works for you. This summer, visit that feel-good state at European Wax Center. Book your smooth escape with the experts at EWC. Make a reservation today, and your first wax is free. Okay, so you can tell that the show is its tone has kind of changed a little bit with the Carey Price conversation. We started a little bit heavy with the topics on Donald Fehr and Eugene Melnyk, and obviously talking about Mike Bossy's passing. Now we're getting a little bit more news neutral and all that, and like stats and stuff like that. And then we'll get to more fun stuff for Ask CJ. We went tough to easy and easygoing for this episode. So thank you for sticking through this Monday edition here. And the next thing I want to bring up is the fact that the Toronto Maple Leafs looks like this season is the greatest Leaf season they've ever had. 50 wins, franchise record, 106 points. Very likely they'll end up with the Hart Trophy winner. Siege, the Leafs, the regular season. It's not supposed to matter. People weren't supposed to care in Toronto, but they look good. They're having their best regular season they've ever had. Thoughts?
And it's funny because, like, to live it in real time, the market hasn't embraced the team in that way, I don't think, fully. I mean, obviously some fans probably have, but everybody lives and dies around here with sort of the ups and downs of any moment. You know, like any team, they've had a couple tough losses or sort of no-show type games. You know, the start of the season was a little bit bumpy. The first 2 weeks, they were dropping games and not looking too inspired while doing so. And yet, when you sort of step back and look at it, pretty hard to argue with the stats. I mean, they still have 6 games to play as we're recording this. So that they got lots of time to add points to that record, add a win or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 to, the franchise best total. You know, you might see Mitch Marner get to 100 points. Austin Matthews already there. Still probably going to see Matthews hit 60 goals. I mean, this, wherever you want to look, there's a lot of great performances. I mean, even Michael Bunting, kind of an unheralded signing in some ways last summer, is that he's crested 60 points already in his first full NHL season. So, even John Tavares is point a game player essentially. It's just funny, like there's so much. I guess there's almost like so many individual riches, but all anyone's concerned about is what happens, in the first week or 2 of May and whether they can win a playoff series. And so, it really looks like they're going to play Tampa now. The Atlantic Division has got a little bit more spread out, and there's not a lot of runway left on the year. Looks like we might get Leafs Lightning, with the Leafs having home ice advantage based on where we're at right now. And so that'll be a pretty compelling series, but my goodness, would you favor the Leafs in that series? Tampa struggled of late, but they still have Andrei Vasilevsky. They still have players that have gotten it done the last 2 playoff years, have a ton of experience. So, it's going to be an interesting next few weeks, I would say, in the Toronto market, because as much as all those great things you mentioned and the records that are being put in place, so much of how this year is remembered is going to be, on 4 to 7 games in the first round of the playoffs.
That is a very fair point. And Steven Stamkos, if it stays that way, will get his wish of playing against the Toronto Maple Leafs in the Stanley Cup playoffs. A big shout out to Kirill Kaprizov as well. Minnesota and St. Louis, it looks like they're going to play each other in the playoffs too. And if they do, I mean, I already had that feeling that it was going to be a pretty good playoff series if they do, but we've had some pretty good games. So Kaprizov breaking the single season record for goals by a Minnesota Wild player in their game over the weekend. I believe the Blues got the better of them in overtime in that game. Yeah,
fun game though. You're right. Lots of sort of to suggest that it's going to be a pretty damn exciting round if they end up meeting. I should mention too, the Leafs go down to Tampa and play this coming week. So you might get a little taste of that playoff series. I mean, we're getting to the point where we have a sense of who might play whom, and you can get some of these little appetizers before the real meal starts in May. So, I'm loving this time of year. I think we've seen a lot of great games here lately.
Absolutely. One last thing before we get to Ask CJ. During Hockey Night in Canada, Jeff Marek brought up something pretty interesting with regards to a potential women's league under the PWHPA. Not sure if people listening or watching this have heard about some of these details that are out there. As he reported, 6-team league in both Canada and the United States could take place between January and April 2023. 23 skaters per team, $35,000 in terms of minimum and $55,000 in terms of average salaries and benefits. So I guess within that range, a 32 game schedule. Also expect a new name for the league. I think also there might have been an actual correction to this as well. The minimum salary is $35,000 and the average is $55,000. I think it's just that it wasn't clear in his initial tweet. And I think he said he initially reported the minimum being $55,000. So the minimum salary in this league is supposed to be $35,000. And the average could be around $55,000. I know this is stuff that Jeff Merrick has put out there. I just like to know your thoughts on the fact that this could be a viable league.
You hope so. I mean, you got to start somewhere. I mean, those salary numbers are still fairly low for, in terms of having it be a living wage. I mean, making $35,000 and getting by on that would be difficult on its own. But you want to be hopeful. You want to think of it that that's where you start and you build momentum, and hopefully that is able to rise over time. I'm just not clear how this works with the PHF, which obviously has a functioning league right now. And I know there've been talks about potentially merging those two leagues, creating one women's league. The NHL has been pretty clear that if it's going to step in and support it, it wants one league essentially to support, maybe something like a WNHL, like the WNBA. I still think we get there one day, but obviously that there just isn't a shared view within the sport. And so, I hope, I just hope the players get somewhere to play. Honestly, there's too many great players. I mean, some of the members of WHPA are the best players in the world, and I know they've been putting on showcase events and having games here and there, but they need a regular place to play. They need to be paid and have a chance to set up stable life. And so, I hope that it goes ahead. And I just, I think we need that. There's just such a obvious window for it. I think that the interest would be tremendous. We saw the way the games were viewed and discussed around the Beijing Olympics. Now that's sort of like the Super Bowl. Doesn't mean just because you watch the Super Bowl, you watch a bunch of NFL regular season games if you're a casual football fan. But I do think that there's enough interest to support this. It's just about putting the right infrastructure in place to get it off the ground.
Well said. And with that, it's time for Ask CJ. It is the segment we do on every Monday episode where we take in questions off Twitter and Discord and we answer them. This first one is very ambitious, and this is why I have my pencil. This is from Stinkface M on Twitter. You, CJ, and Julian are captains of a pickup game. You have to choose your teammates from the SDPN crew. So Steve, Adam, Jesse, Alan, Noxie, Cax, and Andrew. I believe those are the available picks for a team. And you have to assign a center, wing, defense person, and goalie. So we should do a draft style where since your name is high up on the marquee, you should go first and make your first pick. And then I'll take whatever. You go first, then I go first, then you go. We go back and forth. All right. How's that? Cool.
I like it. It's a no-brainer first overall pick. It's got to be Noxie because you need a goaltender. You're not winning anything without a goaltender.
That is very true. That is very, very true. So I'm writing these picks down, and then maybe we can put together some kind of fun graphic that everyone else can see. In that case, I'm going to take Cax because, look, I need an actual hockey player on this team, and Cax is the only actual hockey player left. And hey, what about having a franchise defense person? I'm cool with that. So I will have Cax as my first pick. CJ, goes back to you.
I'm having Jesse Blake. You need that rangy defenseman out there that's difficult to get around. So Jesse's on my blue line.
Okay. I think my next pick, I think he's a goalie. So I think I'm going to have to pick Andrew. Andrew is, if he's not a goalie, you're going to have to put on the pads, buddy. We're going to have to figure something out because I need a goaltender. So we're down to Steve, Adam, and Alan Walsh, actually. So there's three people. So that's actually interesting. So we're going to have to figure out who's going to be the extra person, or we're going to have to maybe add like producer. Can producer Nick play hockey? Can we throw him in? All right, cool. Not? So, okay. So we'll throw a Nick into this. So we're down to Steve, Adam, Nick, and Alan. Who are you picking?
I'm going with Adam Wild next because I need a captain. I need a leader. I need someone who's not going to take any shit.
Well, to that effect, I'm going to take Alan Walsh, who does not ever take any shit from anybody. So I have Cax, Andrew, and Alan Walsh. So we're down to Steve and producer Nick. Who are you picking?
I've got producer Nick rounding out my squad.
Okay, then that means the last pick of the draft, the Phil Kessel of all of this, Steve Dangle, will go on my team. So
did you get 10,000 for charity in a car like Kessel did, or what?
I mean, hey, I don't know. He could. Maybe. We could figure something out. I mean, you have the good goaltending here, so you might have the edge, but I also like the intangibles on my squad as well. So for people who missed the recap here, Noxie, Jesse, Adam, producer Nick on Team CJ, and Team Julian, Cax, Andrew, Alan Walsh, and Steve Dangle on my team. Thank you for the question, Stinkface M. That was very, very fun.
Let's the Cax, though, I'm worried about your team not having good wheels, like not a lot of good skaters on that squad.
I don't know about that, man. You're just going to have to feel the burn because we're going to find ways to get past that team. Don't worry about that. Don't worry. We got you. This next one from Cakes Nick on Twitter. Who gets the best record out of the starting five for the Toronto Blue Jays this year? A baseball question.
Alek Manoah. I'm a believer. I think that great rookie season last year. Saw a lot of promise there, and I think he's going to be the ace of the staff, and it's a good staff. I know Ryu has given us some indigestion early in the season, but I like what I see from the Jays pitchers, and I think Manoah is going to have a great year.
Okay, next one from Not McLeafer on Twitter. Best band of all time.
Oh, tragically hit for me, I guess. I'm not. It's funny. My music tastes sort of evolve over time. Like I've actually been in a weird phase lately. I don't know why. I'm going back and listening to all this 90s music for no reason in particular, but music that was basically popular when I was in high school. And, I've been hitting up some of the Spotify playlists and like going down memory lane. But in general, I just like listening to newer stuff. And I don't mind like Taylor Swift, like in all seriousness. Like like when I was a kid, I loved Radiohead, for example. I went to concerts and they might be, if I had to say, one of the best bands of all time, but like I don't really listen to them much these days. It's not to say I don't like them, but I don't live there too much. The Hip is a band for me. It's tied to like being a kid. It's tied to being at cottages in my youth. And well, now that we're getting to nice weather again, like if I go to a cottage this summer, I feel like I would just love to throw it. It's like feel good music, for me. So that's probably my best band of all time. But truthfully, I don't feel that passionately about, the Rolling Stones versus the Beatles versus whatever. I mean, I kind of float all over the music scene.
Hold that thought on cottages for this next one from the Twitter account. Probably one of the best Twitter account names I've ever seen. Oh yeah, no, for sure. CJ and Julian, what's your perfect vacation? Do you prefer a beach, drinks, and relaxing style or higher tempo, sightseeing, museums, explore new places style?
I'm way higher tempo generally. I like cities. I like going to Europe. Probably going to go there this summer. And I like sort of looking around places with energy, going out to restaurants or bars, what have you, seeing a city that way. Going to sporting events is something I've always done a lot when I've been on vacation. I love sports. And so like, I love getting a feel for a city that way versus, I'm not really one to sit around a pool or a beach for too long and get the sun.
I like the beach. I haven't been on a beach in about maybe 2 years. I would like to change that very soon. But I also like the idea of just kind of going from place to place and not just kind of sitting around, not doing anything. I just like the idea of being on vacation more than just having to be like, oh, which one do I prefer? So like,
are you gonna go on vacation this summer? Do you have any plans? What's going on?
I have no clue. I just know I want to take a lot of August off. That's what I know for sure. That's what I like. I'm aiming for August to be the month where I take a lot of time off. And then maybe I just like, I don't know, go somewhere and not just like, oh, I want to go to Toronto. Cause like Toronto is like right there. I could always just go kind of whenever. That's not a vacation in my mind. I don't know. I'll figure that out. I'll find a place. I don't know. I'm still kind of at that point where I'm just like working so hard and like, the idea of taking a vacation, like I have to be careful about like, oh, if I go too long or whatever, but like having benefits now also helps.
Take some advice. You need to refresh. Everybody needs some time away. You're going to come back twice as good at your job when you have that mental relaxation or when you see something else, experience something else. So you deserve a vacation, bud. You work hard.
As do you. Next question from J Roybot 94 on Discord. This is a bit of a long one. Hello, friends. I'm from Ontario, but I've lived in Edmonton the last 4 years. My girlfriend and I will be visiting Toronto on the weekend of April 23rd and 24th for a weekend of nonstop fun. We booked Marley's tickets since Leafs are out of town, but we want to know what CJ would recommend as a bar, pub, restaurant to attend specifically to watch the Leafs. Bonus points if you can recommend us a place close to Coca-Cola Coliseum for the Sunday game. So that's question one in this long block of text. I'll take a break and then let you answer that one and get to the second question.
Oh, I fear I'm going to do some disservice here.
Oh, I didn't expect that at all. I thought you would have rocked this one.
No, I mean, I actually think Toronto's missing a great sports bar.
Really?
It's actually been my view. I mean, obviously there are sports bars, but I feel like
what about Real Sports?
Real Sports is the obvious one. The thing that what I like about Real Sports is I guarantee wherever you sit in that venue, you'll see a TV, and if the Leafs are playing or the Raptors are playing, they'll have the sound on. Because for me, I'm a big sound on guy, Julian. If I'm there to watch a sporting event, and I just find there's a lot of bars in Toronto that are reluctant to put the sound on for an event. And so like there's good bars, but then you go there and like, yeah, you can see the game, but if you can't hear it, it's not quite the same. So I think Real Sports is a can't miss. There's a bar called Beer Town I really like. I think it's a chain around Ontario now, but there's one on University and Wellington in Toronto. They got a great beer selection. They actually have really good food for a pub, and they got tons of TVs, but I just don't know if they'll put the sound on for you. I haven't been there because I go to, I'm usually at the game, so I don't know what the scene is for Leafs game there, but it's a good sports bar. Those aren't particularly close to Coca-Cola Coliseum though. I mean, maybe the closest you get to there is if maybe you go to something like the Wheat Sheaf on King West or something like that. It's not close, but you could walk to the Coca-Cola Coliseum afterwards. Yeah, that's my best I can give you. I don't know what the scene's like in the city, man. It's been weird. The pandemic is strange. Like I'm going out way less than I used to. I know that much. Like I think our habits have shifted a little bit too. So I'm not as up on the best places to go.
Okay, you might be up on the second half of this question, though. Second question is that she has never had pizza before, and we want to know for someone who enjoys every kind of pizza, what are the top 3 pizzas you would recommend for someone who has never had pizza? Also, are there any other sneaky good sides to order from pizza as well?
Wow. This is designed for, I love the Canadian A, it's called. It's that like pepperoni, mushroom, and bacon on it. To me, that's my go-to pizza order. In fact, I don't really even have a second or third because that is literally like, if I'm just getting it for me, I don't have to account for anyone else's taste. That's what I would get. You can't go wrong with the creamy garlic dipping sauce either, or the jalapeno cheddar. Those are my 2 favorite dipping sauces. But I love pizza. I know it takes a lot of crap, so like be prepared. You might not like it. I'm not out here telling you what your taste should be, but I'm saying that you grow up on this stuff. Like I know there are other pizza truthers out there, and I'm one of them.
This podcast, by the way, is not sponsored by Pizza. It'd be nice, but it is not sponsored by Pizza. Last one from Warren876543 on Discord. Thoughts on having an NBA style play-in tournament for the NHL? Also, should we just go 1 through 8 in the conference for playoff seeding like the NBA and only have divisions for scheduling purposes?
Yes and yes. It's Gary Bettman is steadfastly against this. So as long as he's the commissioner, I don't expect it to change. But let's face it, these leagues all copy each other. And you have baseball, the wild card system. I think those tend to be some of the most compelling games you get in the baseball playoffs every year. And if we had some sort of 7 versus 10, 8 versus 9 play-in each conference, those 4 games, like say the day after the regular season ends or 2 days after the regular season game ends, I think would be tremendous. I know it maybe cheapens the value of an 82-game season for some or what have you, but it creates drama. It creates entertainment. It creates another TV product that can be bought and sold. Can generate revenue for the players and the owners, and everyone else is doing it. I think it's going to happen at some point in the future. And, I beat the drum on this. I can't believe we don't have 1 to 8 first in the conferences.
Me too.
I understand you're trying to create these divisional rivalries, but so many of the divisions aren't all rivalries anyway. I mean, you might get Edmonton, LA, say in the first round. I mean, it's great if you get Edmonton, Calgary, of course. But Edmonton, LA isn't a rivalry. Like I know those teams did play in the 80s and the Gretzky era once the Kings actually beat the Oilers sort of stunningly. But in general, you still get as many sort of non-traditional matchups that way. And so I think 1 versus 8 in the conference is the way to go. But as I say, I don't think this is changing as long as Gary Bettman's running the league. But my guess is once we get a new commissioner at some point in the future, these are just obvious things. I mean, there's owners that want the play in too. I mean, they just see, first of all, it keeps more teams in the quote unquote playoff race. I mean, if the top 10 in each conference at least get a play-in game, then the top 12 right now in each conference still have a shot to get in with 2 weeks left in the season. And, you know, I do think it's going to create more revenue and those types of things. So it's a natural change in the future, but we're not getting it anytime soon.
That's a shame because I think a play-in game that just makes perfect sense, but expecting the NHL to make perfect sense sometimes, not as common as we would think. And that's going to do it for Ask CJ on this Monday edition of the Chris Johnston Show. CJ, we did it. We found a way to get through an entire episode again for the 61st time, or however many times we have done this episode. We did it.
And neither of us had to wear sunglasses to get it done. So credit to us.
Yeah, because that would have been absolutely ridiculous if we did. All right. Check out all the other podcasts on the SDPN. Subscribe to the SDPN YouTube page. Subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Thursday's episode will have stick taps and that surprise I teased at the beginning of this episode, which involves your participation, you listening or watching to this podcast. So be on the lookout for what that is on Thursday. For CJ, I'm Julian saying so long. So long.
Peace.
The Chris Johnston Show. Inside the game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JK McKenzie.